Hi, welcome to Rules Challenge. My name's Carter Maxwell, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at the game Spirit Island. Now, I've been hesitant to do a video on this game just because most of the complexity comes from the cards and the various spirit powers that you don't even necessarily encounter every game. But the more I thought about it, it became clear to me that there's enough questions that come up over just the base rules of the game that it was worth doing a rules challenge on. In case you're new to the show, here's how it works. I'll basically just be playing a regular game, doing regular moves, but periodically I'll stop and ask legal or illegal. And I'll just wait a couple seconds, so if you want time to think about the question, just pause the video then, but then I'll go on and answer the question and give some explanation. Now, before we get started, a couple things I should mention. I did become aware recently of an errata on the Blight card that probably a lot of people aren't aware of, so I thought I'd mention it here. And you'll see me implement the fix during the game. The Healthy Island side of the card says 2 Blight per player. Actually, that should be 2 Blight per player plus 1. So in our 3-player game, I started with 7 Blight, not 6. Another thing you might notice that's a bit unusual is I've got this orange pawn I'm using when I'm targeting a land. It's not part of the rules and it doesn't come with the game, but I like to use it whenever I play just to mark a land that I'm targeting, and especially for the purposes of this video, it'll make it a lot easier for you to track what lands I've targeted in each example. And then just to catch you up on where we're at in the game, as I mentioned, it's a 3-player game. We have 3 spirits in play, and the game's already well in progress. And I've recently started a new round. I'm not going to show you the spirit phase, so the spirits have all done their growth. They've gotten their energy, they've picked their power cards and paid for them. So we'll be picking up the game at the start of the fast powers phase. There's no player order we have to adhere to here, so I'll just pick a spirit at random to start with. We'll go ahead and start with Vital Strength of the Earth. He doesn't have the right combination of elements to do an innate power, and he just has 1 fast power card, so we'll go ahead and resolve that. That card is Guard the Healing Land. It has 2 effects. One is Remove 1 Blight, and the other is Defend 4. We'll target this jungle land here that's adjacent to a space where Earth has presence, and we'll remove 1 Blight. And we'll return that to the Blight card. And then we'll place a defense marker as a reminder that we're defending 4 in that land. And then we'll tap that card to show we're done with it. The mistake here was that Earth targeted a land that was out of range. Remember to watch for any restrictions on range when you're activating a power. In this case, the range was 1 from a sacred site. And remember that a sacred site is indicated by 2 or more presence markers. So Earth could have targeted a land within 1 of his 2 sacred sites up here, but since this wasn't a sacred site, he wasn't able to reach this jungle land down here. Another thing worth pointing out that Earth did do correctly was the removal of the Blight from that jungle space. Remember that it's going back onto the Blight card, not just out of the game. If you're consistently losing at the game, that's one of the things to make sure you're doing correctly, because moving Blight out of the game rather than to the card, it makes the game more difficult. Alright, now let's resolve the fast powers for Shadows Flicker Like Flame. We'll start with the Concealing Shadows card. That card has a range of 0, so we have to target a land where Shadows has presence. Shadows is playing red, so we'll go ahead and target this mountain land here. The card's first effect is simply that we get to gain 1 fear. First, we'll move a fear marker down to the generated fear area. The card's second effect is Dahan take no damage from ravaging invaders this turn. So we'll place a reminder marker on that land so we remember that later. Then we'll tap that card to show we're done with it. Shadow's Innate power is a fast power as well, so we'll go ahead and resolve that. Checking for elements that are relevant to the innate power. We've got 3 moons, 2 orange, whatever that represents, and 2 purple. 3, 2, and 2 is enough to allow Shadows to implement the first 2 effects, but not the third. We can target a land that's within 1 of red's sacred sites. So we'll target this southwest jungle. The first effect allows us to gather 1 explorer. So we'll move this explorer from the mountain space down to the jungle. The next effect allows us to destroy up to 2 explorers, and we get 1 fear per explorer destroyed. So we'll go ahead and destroy 2 explorers, and we'll gain 2 fear. We can't really tap a power that's printed on the spirit panel, but I like to cover it up just as a reminder that it's been used, so I'll throw this energy marker on there. And that wraps up Shadow's fast powers. The thing I wanted to show here was that you can use multiple effects of your innate powers as long as you meet the threshold element requirements. The elements don't get used up as you activate the effect, so Shadows was able to do both the first and second effect. Now that said, make sure on whatever spirit you're playing that the effects don't say instead at the start of the effect, because in those cases you do have to choose between the effects. You can't activate them all. Note that these aren't separate powers. The heading innate powers, plural, is a little misleading. Shadows only has 1 innate power. Compare that to something like Thunderspeaker, which really does have multiple innate powers. The reason that's worth pointing out is just to make it clear that you are targeting a single land and doing all these effects. It's all being done as part of resolving a single power a single time. Moving on to River Surges and Sunlight, they've just got 1 fast power to resolve. That card's Vigor of the Breaking Dawn. It has a range of 2. We have to target a land with Dahan, and we'll do 2 damage per Dahan in the target land. We'll target this jungle space, which is within 2 of several of our purple markers. We can do 2 damage per Dahan. There's 2 there for a total of 4. There's only 3 health worth of invaders here, so we'll just destroy both the town and the explorer. For the town we destroyed, we'll gain a fear. And for the explorer we destroyed, we'll gain a fear. Then we can do an additional effect if we have the right elements in place, so we'll double check that. We need at least 3 yellow and 2 red. We have exactly 3 yellow and 2 red, so that's just enough. So now we may push up to 2 Dahan, and in lands where we push them, we can do 2 damage per Dahan again. So we'll push these 2 into this adjacent mountain space. We'll do 2 damage per Dahan for a total of 4. So we'll destroy these 2 towns. And then we'll gain 1 fear for each town destroyed. 1, 2. And then we'll tap that card to show we're done. Almost everything Rivers did there was legal, but remember, explorers don't generate fear when they're destroyed. You get 1 fear for destroyed town, 2 for a destroyed city, but 0 for destroyed explorers. Alright, we're ready to move on to the Invader phase. First off, we would resolve the Blight card, but it's still on the healthy side, so there's nothing for us to do there. Then we would resolve any earned fear cards, but we don't have any at the moment. Now we move on to the Ravage phase, and there's probably a lot to do there because the Coastal Lands card is up. We'll start things off in this jungle space. Remember, this marker is telling us we have a defense of 4. The invaders do a damage of 3, 4, 5, so there's only 1 leftover damage. So we'll go ahead and apply that to one of the Dahan, and that's it for the invader damage. Then the Dahan will fight back at a strength of 4, so we'll apply 3 of those to the city and 1 to an explorer. And then for destroying that city, we'll gain 2 fear. The aspect of this move that's sometimes questioned is whether the Dahan should have done 3 damage or 4. But even though one of the Dahan has been damaged and its health reduced to 1, it nevertheless fights back at full strength, so 4 damage applied to the invaders was correct. Let's move on to this coastal wetland. We have a town and 2 explorers for a total of 4 damage. The Dahan have 2 health each, so they'll absorb all 4 of those damage. And we'll take them out of the game. And since there's no leftover damage, we won't apply a Blight to that space. That move was illegal. I'll just quick set it back up the way it was. Remember, the Dahan don't absorb any of the damage to the land itself. During the Invader's Ravage action, two different things are happening. They're damaging the land and they're fighting the Dahan. You apply all the damage to one, you apply all the damage to the other. You don't get to split it up or distribute it between the two. So the 4 damage would have been enough to add a blight to the land and also to eliminate all the Dahan. Moving on to this coastal mountain, there's nothing to resolve there. Same with this coastal wetland, but we do have something to resolve in this jungle space. We have 1 town and 1 explorer for a total of 3 damage. That'll be enough to add a blight to the land. Then we'll apply those 3 damage to the Dahan. We'll give each one a damage. Then they'll fight back for a total of 6 damage. And that's enough to eliminate both the town and the explorer. For eliminating that town, we'll get another fear. The mistake this time was applying the damage evenly across the Dahan. You have to apply it so that it maximizes the losses to the Dahan. So those 3 damage should have been applied first 2 entirely to 1 Dahan, and then the 3rd one to another, and then the 3rd one would have been undamaged. Moving on with resolving our ravage phase in coastal lands, we've got nothing to do in this wetland or this sand. The only place we have to resolve anything now is this coastal mountain space. We have a city and 2 explorers here for a total of 5 damage. That's more than enough to cause another blight to be added to the land. We'll get that blight from the blight card. That actually happens to be the last one on the card, so that's going to cause this to flip. And then we'll fill it up with 5 per player. All right, that's filled back up. You don't have to count them all. You can trust me. We'll place that blight, and that's going to cause a cascade because there's one already there. And we don't have any great options because every adjacent space already has a blight. So I'll just go ahead and put one down here in the wetlands. And that's going to cascade again. And I'll move over here and finally find a space that doesn't already have a blight. And since we added a blight to this space, I'll go ahead and remove 1 presence for yellow and 1 for red. Now we need to resolve the Invader damage against the Dahan, but remember we put this marker here to remind us the Dahan aren't taking any damage this turn. So they'll just go ahead and fight back. They'll do a total of 4 damage. We'll apply 3 to the city and 1 to an explorer. And for eliminating that city, we'll gain 2 more fear. That move is totally legal, but there were some things I wanted to point out here. One is when you have to remove presence from a space, it doesn't go back to your panel. It does go out of the game like I showed here. That was my first big mistake when I was first playing the game, and you'll figure out quickly that something's wrong if you put it back on your spirit panel because the game becomes impossible very fast. Also, keep in mind, when there's a spirit that has multiple presence markers in a land, it doesn't have to remove all its markers. It's just 1 marker per spirit that has to be removed. The other thing I wanted to talk about was how we handled adding the blight to the space. First, remember that a land will only get 1 blight during a ravage. It doesn't matter if a dozen damage is done or just 2. You only add 1 new blight token. And then the other thing is just always remembering to watch if you need to resolve a cascade effect if there was a blight already in the space when you added a new one. Now we're done ravaging in coastal lands, so we'll move on to building in mountain lands. Fortunately for us, we only have 2 mountain spaces that we need to build in. There's already a town here, so we'll add a city. And there's just an explorer here, so we'll add a town. The only thing I wanted to mention here was just the reminder that any type of invader presence will cause a build. It's not just the explorers. If there's an explorer there, town, city, any of those would cause a build in the space. Now it's time to move on to the explore phase, so we'll flip a card and see what we get. And we need to explore in wetlands. This wetland has a town and city next to it, so we'll go ahead and place an explorer there. This one doesn't have either a town or city, so we won't place anything there. This one has an adjacent town, so we'll add an explorer there. This one has a town right inside it, so we'll add another explorer. Moving on to the last two wetland spaces. This one doesn't have a town or city next to it. This one has one right there, so we'll add an explorer. And to wrap things up, we'll advance the Invader cards. That move was illegal because we did not put an explorer in this wetland space. Sure, it's got no town or city adjacent to it, but remember that adjacent oceans also generate explorers. But remember that explorers themselves don't generate new explorers. So it was correct this space didn't get an explorer because there's no town or city adjacent to it and it's not on the coast. Now that we're done with the Invader phase, it's time for the spirits to resolve their slow powers. We'll start off by resolving one of Shadow's cards. The card we're looking at is Mantle of Dread. It says any spirit can be targeted, so shadows will just target themselves. First off, we'll gain 2 fear. And those are actually the last 2 fear in our fear pool. So we'll gain a fear card. And we'll take a look at that, but we won't actually resolve it at this time. Then we'll return all the fear to the pool. Then it says target spirit may push 1 explorer and 1 town from a land where it has presence. Shadows will target this mountain space where they have presence, and they'll push an explorer and a town. And then they'll tap that card. The thing that was done wrong here was revealing that fear card when it was earned. You should just move it face down from the fear deck into the earn fear cards area. Now that sounds like a really technical quibble, but it can make a huge difference if you allow yourself a preview of what the fear card effect is going to be. We're going to hold off on resolving Shadow's other card for now and instead resolve Earth's 2 slow powers. We'll start with the card Draw of the Fruitful Earth, which has a range of 1. That'll allow us to gather up to 2 explorers and 2 Dahan. We'll target this mountain space where we have presence. Then we can gather 2 explorers. So we'll grab 2 from this wetlands. Then we can gather 2 Dahan. So we'll get these 2 from the adjacent jungle. And then we'll tap that card. Then we'll resolve the card Pull Beneath the Hungry Earth that has a range of 1. It says if target land has your presence, 1 fear and 1 damage. We'll target the sand space where Earth has presence. So we'll gain that fear. And for our 1 damage, we'll destroy this explorer. Now to resolve the second effect, it says if target land is sand or wetland, 1 damage. And since the target land is sand, we can resolve the second effect and do 1 more damage, and we'll do 1 damage to that town. And then we'll tap that card to show we're done. The only thing in this turn I'd highlight as being of special interest is that Earth had gathered from different lands. When you're gathering pieces, they don't have to come from the same land, they just have to end up in the target land. So it was fine that Earth reached out to this wetlands for explorers and up to this jungle for Dahan. In fact, they could have spread it around even more than that, drawing an explorer from the sands instead of the wetlands, or 1 Dahan from this jungle and 1 from this wetlands, or whatever. River has 2 cards and an innate power we need to resolve. We'll start out with Song of Sanctity that has a range of 1, and we have to target a mountain or jungle. It says if target land has explorers, push all the explorers, otherwise remove 1 blight. We'll target this mountain land, which is within 1 of our presence marker, and there's no explorers there, so we'll remove a blight. And we'll return that to the blight card. And then we'll tap that card. Now we'll do River's Bounty, which has a range of 0. We can target any land and we can gather up to 2 Dahan. We'll target this wetland where we have presence and gather 2 Dahan from this adjacent jungle. For the second effect, it says if there are now at least 2 Dahan, add 1 Dahan and gain 1 energy. Now since there are at least 2 Dahan, we add 1 and we'll gain that 1 energy. And then we'll tap it to show that card's done. That move is legal. About the only thing that I notice people question sometimes is whether or not that damaged Dahan can be gathered, but it can be moved around just like a regular undamaged Dahan. Let's go ahead now and resolve River's slow innate power. We're looking for yellow, blue, and gray elements. We've got 3 yellow, but just 2 blue and no gray, so we'll be limited to just the first effect. That'll allow us to target any land within 1 of a sacred site, and we can push either an explorer or a town. I'm going to finally make use of one of our Spirit's special rules. For rivers, your presence in wetlands count as sacred sites. We'll target this sand area, which is within 1 of our presence in a wetland, and then we'll push this town to the adjacent sand space. That move put us in a good position to make use of Shadow's last slow power. We can target any land, but our range is 0. So we'll target the sand land where we had just pushed that town. For the first effect, we get to gain 2 fear. We'll gain those 2 fear. Then for the next effect, we can either replace 1 town with an explorer or 1 city with a town. So we can replace this town with an explorer. Now keep in mind, we're replacing this town rather than destroying it, so we won't gain a fear for that. But also, it's already got 1 damage, so the explorer would come in with 1 damage. And since it's only got 1 health to begin with, it'll get destroyed. And then to wrap things up, we'll tap that card. That move is legal. There's a couple things that might have looked off to people. One is pushing around a damaged town, but just like how we had gathered a damaged Dahan earlier, that's totally fine. And then the other thing that would look most weird to people is that we brought in that explorer with 1 damage and just took him right back out again. But the rules do specifically mention that when you replace a damaged piece, the new piece comes in damaged. And in this case, that explorer didn't have any extra health to absorb that damage, so he just had to leave the game. Well, that brings us to the time passes phase of the game, which seems like a good place to wrap things up. I want to thank everybody who stuck around to the end of the video. I hope you got all the questions right, or if not, I hope you learned something new from the questions you got wrong. And if you enjoyed the video, check out my other episodes, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks.